To wrap up our study of Agile practices, we look at a number of practices which are essentially management practices. That is to say, they help us manage and organize an Agile project. Perhaps the most important is the first one, the Scrum of Scrums, because it addresses the issue of scaling up Agile methods. Agile methods have often been viewed as addressing only small projects. In fact, the creators of extreme programming, which was one of the first Agile methods to come out, readily acknowledged that it was mostly for small projects, but as Agile methods have been more and more widely adopted, many people have tried to see how they could be applied to bigger projects beyond the 7 plus or minus 2 ideal size that we mentioned in an earlier lecture. So Scrum in particular came up with the idea of Scrum of Scrums. So Scrum of Scrums, as the name suggests, is simply a bigger project organized as a collection of ordinary Scrum projects, and what happens is that there is an extra meeting to coordinate between these various Scrums, these various projects, each day after the daily meeting, also known as the daily Scrum. So in that meeting, clusters of teams discuss areas of overlap and integration. A designated person for every Scrum project attends, and the agenda is the same as the daily Scrum. Remember the three questions: what did we do yesterday, what are we going to do today, and what are the impediments. But here there are 4 additional questions which are the ones relevant to the coordination between individual projects. What has your team done since we last met? What will your team do before we meet again? Is anything slowing your team down? So again, emphasis on impediments. And are you about to put something in another team's way? So the idea here is to remove impediments even before they arise by making sure that if there is a dependency between the work of a team and another, and in particular if there's a potential for trouble because of what one of the teams is going to do, it's known in advance so that it can be handled properly. The next practice, coming from extreme programming but also widely adopted in Scrum, is what we may call whole team. And we've seen some of this already when talking about cross-functional projects. All contributors sit together. It's this practice of XP as members of a team, so that there's always a business representative. This is somehow the XP idea of the embedded customer, but programmers are there, possibly testers, analysts, and a coach or a manager. So here we're kind of in a pre-Scrum world in which the roles of Scrum Master, Product Owner, and so on have not been that precisely defined. We are in a broader context, but of course this is easy to transpose to the exact context of a Scrum project with the Scrum rules that we saw in the last lecture. The important point here, regardless of the method details and the role details, is to make sure that we bring everyone under one roof, in particular representatives of the various stakeholder categories, developers, and people representing customers. There's a technique here which really belongs more to the folklore, but some people take it seriously. To me, it's really part of the folklore of Agile messages planning poker. So it's a technique which is used in Scrum in particular to estimate the duration, meaning the effort and the cost of any particular task. Of course, various people may have widely differing estimates, and the planning poker, which is a variant of a technique known as wideband Delphi, is based on cards. So you can buy these cards from various providers, and each card represents a duration. So typically it's in days, it could also be in half days or possibly in hours, but usually it's days, with perhaps one in half days. So it could be like 0, 1.5, 1, 2, and so on, except that we don't want to have people haggle over this task is going to take 6 days. No, it's going to take 7 days. These are too small differences. So typically people use a sequence such as the Fibonacci sequence, which has the advantage of growing much faster after the first few values so that we don't argue or haggle over small differences. And so the idea works like this. We are taking a certain task. We're a group of people, and each one of us is going to have his idea of how long the task is going to take, a half day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever. So we think very hard to determine that idea without immediately revealing our choice to the others. We may talk, of course, but we each decide for ourselves, and then at some point we reveal our cards, we show our estimates. If the estimates of everyone in the team are the same, this ends the process. That value is going to be the estimate. Otherwise, we talk, we try to justify our respective assessments, and then we play again until we all agree. This is rather simplistic because task estimation, software cost estimation is a difficult area, and there is a really strong chance in a process like this that the loud talkers, not necessarily the most experienced people, are going to influence the others who just want to move on, especially if they do not have themselves to implement the task. But I give you this technique for what it's worth, since it is widely applied and shown as an example of Agile and specifically Scrum practice. We come now to workplace practices. Agile methods have put a lot of emphasis on the role of the workplace, and basically they want to have workspace that enables everyone to communicate with everyone else. The emphasis is on communication. Now, one thing that should be said here at the outset is that workspace is important, but after all, some of the most successful tech companies were started in a garage, and sometimes there's a little bit too much of emphasis on this aspect in the Agile method. So Extreme Programming in Crystal and others emphasize the need for an open workspace which is organized around pairing stations. If we do pair programming as in XP with lots of whiteboard space, this is certainly a very good idea. We need to have ways to communicate, to discuss our designs, and people are locating according to conversations they should overhear. That is to say, is it good or bad that Team A will be able to overhear what Team B, 2 or 3 people, are discussing? This is going to be the primary criterion, and of course there should be a place for private conversations. Now, this is again part of what we could characterize as the folklore. It could even be detrimental because not all programmers like to communicate, and you have excellent programmers who work best by concentrating in a quiet space. Of course, this would be anathema to the Agile view of pair programming all the time, but it is more important to recognize the diversity of personalities and to avoid imposing a standard communicate pattern on everyone. Crystal emphasizes in the same spirit the notion of what Alistair Cockburn calls a smarty communication, where the team is together in a room and listens to each other. Information can flow around. A developer must be forced, if necessary, to break his or her concentration. Questions are answered rapidly. This is all in line with, as you may remember, what the Lean method called amplify learning. This was one of the Lean principles, and of course the faster you hear about what's going on, the faster you get information, the more effective your software development is going to be in this view. On the other hand, again, this should be taken with a grain of salt because software development is a highly demanding intellectual activity, close in many respects to mathematics, and sometimes you just want to shut yourself off and think, even if this is not viewed as the optimal in communication according to the Agile view. The workspace should not only be open and osmotic, it should also be informative. And here we have a set of practical, very simple but very useful ideas. Make sure that communication is facilitated through techniques such as a storyboard. We're going to study the storyboard in connection with the artifacts, the next lecture. A storyboard is a place where you record the progress of ongoing tasks and ongoing user stories. Release charts, iteration burn down charts. We will also study the burn down charts in the next lecture. Various indicators showing the status of the latest test, the latest release. This is all quite important because it boosts team morale. When you see what's going on, even if you're stuck yourself, if you see the progress that has been made, it really can help. And this part of the advice and this part of the practices is very good. Also, a piece of advice which should be obvious, but which for many non-technical managers is not, is given in Crystal. Give developers the tools that they need. Don't skimp on things like memory. Give them the access to all the tools that they need to be effective software developers. Extreme programming emphasizes the need for team continuity. Try to avoid moving people around teams all the time. Keep the team together and stable. This is again halfway between a principle and a practice. A perhaps more controversial principle propounded by XP is shrinking teams. The recommendation here is that as a team grows in capability, keep its workload constant but gradually reduce its size so that you can have a free-forming set of teams, and when the team has too few members, merge it with another too small team. It's interesting to picture this kind of game of life organization of teams. I'm not sure how many companies can really practice this. Another practice which really follows from previous principles is to maintain only code and tests as permanent artifacts. This is again somewhat extreme, but it's quite in line with the lean view that we've seen, that in the end only deliverables matter. In line with the extreme programming emphasis on having an embedded customer, there is this general recommendation in the agile world of involving customers throughout. So in the XP style, which is representing here, this is an embedded customer. The idea is more general. It can be applied also in the context of Scrum with a product owner. The role of customers can be to help write user stories, to help make sure the designed functionality is there. During the planning meeting, to negotiate the selection of user stories for release. In Scrum, this is not going to be any customer, is going to be customers represented by the product owner. The customers, of course, should have their say again represented by the product owner in Scrum. In the negotiation, in the definition of the release timing, which should be a negotiation, and they should be involved in anything that has consequences on business goals, which is actually a lot. And Wells justifies this by saying that this may seem a lot of the customer's time, but it's going to be saved by all the mistakes that we avoid making by having a well-specified and cooperative system. Finally, there is a principle that we find in extreme programming, which is slack. So again, one can be a bit doubtful as to how many companies will be willing to apply this. It comes from a book with the same title by Tom DeMarco, the same author as Peopleware, which was also very influential on the Agile school. And DeMarco advocates for not being too tight, not filling every second of your workday, but leaving some room. And according to extreme programming, this is an important practice, not to fill everyone's agenda, but in any plan, including some minor tasks that are really not be essential and can be dropped if you get behind. And the goals are to establish trust in the team's ability to deliver, because it's always dangerous to have a plan that is too strong, too ambitious, since the risk is high that you will not entirely fulfill it, so the team will get frustrated and morale will go down. If, on the contrary, you put in a little stuff here and there that is not essential, well, the essential goals will be achieved, and this is good for the morale. And of course, we want to reduce waste. What we've seen in this final segment of the practices lecture is a number of management practices that all are there to support the agile principles of the previous lecture, in particular by respecting developers, by ensuring that management gives developers the support and comfort they need to apply the principles and practices of agile development.